But this is the setup. John's disciples standing on the fringe of the party. Apparently they had been fasting recently, and maybe that, is the reason why they were so cranky that day. Now, the Old Testament calls for fasting one day a year. And so people who were Jewish people would have fasted during that Day of Atonement, and that was what they had to do. But many people in the Old Testament and today use fasting as a kind of a spiritual discipline to help them to draw closer to God. And so they may do that on a weekly basis or a monthly basis, some other kind of once-in-a-while type of a basis. Well, the Pharisees, during the time of Jesus, fasted twice a week, 2 different days a week they would fast. And John's disciples, since they kind of compare themselves to the Pharisees, were probably somewhere in that kind of a category. But Jesus wasn't fasting. Jesus was at a party with his friends, and they were eating and they were drinking and having a good time. And John's disciples were confused or maybe jealous. So they asked about it. And Jesus' response to this is telling. He says, look, when you're at a wedding, you don't fast. A wedding is a time for a party. When the bridegroom is here and you're getting ready for the wedding, you don't say, hey guys, let's mourn and stop eating for a while. You say, no, let's have a party and enjoy all the food that we can have. And when the bridegroom is here, that's when you feast. Now, John's disciples should have known that Jesus was the bridegroom. In fact, in John chapter 3, John the Baptist points to Jesus, and he talks about him as the bridegroom, John the Baptist as the friend of the bridegroom. So they knew that analogy was there. In fact, throughout the Old Testament, Israel was known as the bride, and God was known as the bridegroom. So John pointing out Jesus as the bridegroom, and Jesus calling himself the bridegroom, is actually a claim to be God. Just like the God of Israel, I'm the bridegroom. And he's saying, look, when the bridegroom shows up for the party, you don't have a fast. Maybe you'll fast another time, but now is not the time for fasting. So the disciples of John should be familiar with this idea. Jesus is just continuing on an analogy that John gave. And this scenario with this confrontation and this question is the setup for Jesus' big idea. And this is Jesus' big idea for today. The kingdom of God does not fit in your old paradigm. The kingdom of God does not fit in your old paradigm. Notice this is the 3rd time in a chapter that some religious leaders are confronting Jesus. And Jesus is going contrary to religious convention. The first time they said, how dare you say you can forgive sins? And Jesus said, not only can I forgive sins, but I can heal this guy to prove that I have the power to forgive sins. So he forgives his sins, and then he heals them, and he gets up and walks away, showing that he has the power to forgive sins. The second time, the Pharisees are saying, how dare you eat with these tax collectors and sinners? And Jesus says, that's what the kingdom of God is like. I've come for people who are sick. That's what a doctor comes for, not people who are well. And then this third confrontation, face-to-face with Jesus, is about fasting. How come you're not doing the rituals the way that we say that you should be doing the rituals? How come you're not living in self-denial? And Jesus is breaking through barriers. Jesus is wanting people to know that this is not just good old boy religion. This is not the structure and the dogma that you thought you had. And the results of living life the kingdom way versus the religious way will be very, very different. So contrast these results. If you're on the side of the Pharisees and John the Baptist's disciples in all of these questions, here's what you'll wind up with. Religion that leads to guilt, isolation, and self-denial. If you're on the kingdom of God side of the equation, you get forgiveness, integration, and feasting. So I ask you the question, which one of these kingdoms do you want to be a part of? The kingdom of religion or the kingdom of God that Jesus brings? See, by saying this, Jesus is putting the religious authorities on notice. This new kingdom is not the same as your old, stuffy, rule-keeping, constraining, miserable religion. It's freedom, and it's hope, and it's life to the full. It's God himself who loves you deeply, bringing health and healing and wholeness to this scarred planet, not in a new form of religion, but in a relationship with a living God, a God who loves you right where you're at, a God who loves you for who you are.